My name is Whitney Calloway, and I'm 34 years old. The Sunday my mother-in-law tried to destroy my marriage with a DNA test, I already knew what the results would say. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined, was that those same results would dismantle her instead. And the wildest part? I'd had 2 weeks to prepare. 2 weeks of silence. 2 weeks of letting her build the stage she planned to burn me on. 2 weeks of knowing exactly what was coming and exactly who would walk away in ashes. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want to ask you something. Have you ever felt someone slowly, methodically trying to erase you from your own life? Not with loud accusations, but with quiet questions, raised eyebrows, little comments that pile up like snow until you can't find the path back to who you were? And if you've ever been measured by someone who had already decided you didn't belong, hit like and subscribe. Because this is the story of how one envelope, one dinner, and one secret turned everything inside out. I met Margaret Ashford on a Thursday in September, 8 years ago. I was 26. My boyfriend Derek and I had been together for 5 months. He'd talked about his mother the way people talk about difficult weather, not complaining exactly, just preparing you. She's particular, he said. She notices things. I didn't understand what that meant until I walked through her front door. The Ashford house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in Wellesley, Massachusetts. Brick colonial, black shutters, hedges trimmed with what looked like surgical precision. Margaret opened the door before we reached it, which meant she'd been watching from the window. She was tall, sharp-boned, with hair the color of expensive mahogany pulled into a low twist. She wore a cream cardigan and pearl studs, and the kind of smile that doesn't reach anything above the cheekbones. "Whitney," she said. Not a question. "Derek's told us very little about you. Come in." Her handshake was dry and cool. Her eyes moved across me like she was conducting an inventory. Shoes, bag, posture, smile. I could feel her cataloging each item into some internal spreadsheet I'd never see. The living room was immaculate. Not clean, immaculate. The kind of room where every throw pillow had a purpose and every book on the shelf faced exactly the same direction. Derek's father, Howard, sat in a leather armchair near the fireplace. He was a large man with quiet hands and the expression of someone who'd learned decades ago that silence was safer than speech. He nodded at me, said, "Welcome," and returned to his newspaper. Derek's younger sister Paige was there too. She was 23 then, still living at home, still dressing like she was auditioning for a lifestyle blog. She hugged Derek, smiled at me with too many teeth, and said, "Oh, you're so pretty. I love your dress. Where did you get it?" The question felt like a pop quiz. "Target," I said. Paige blinked. "Target. Wow. I wouldn't have guessed." Margaret poured wine. She asked about my work. I was a speech-language pathologist at a pediatric rehabilitation center in Worcester. She asked where I grew up, Springfield, Massachusetts. My father was a high school physics teacher. My mother had died of breast cancer when I was 14. I told her this because she asked, and because I'd learned a long time ago not to hide it. Margaret nodded slowly, touched one pearl earring, and said, "That must have been very hard for you." The words were kind. The delivery was a filing cabinet. At dinner, she steered the conversation with the quiet authority of someone who'd been doing it for decades. She asked Derek about his job. He'd just been promoted to senior project manager at a commercial construction firm. She asked Paige about her marketing internship. She asked Howard about the landscaping project. Then she turned to me. "Whitney, do you have any siblings?" "One brother. Older. He lives in California." "And your father?" "He's still in Springfield." "He is. He remarried a few years ago." "Oh." The pearl earring again. "How nice for him." A pause. "Do you see him often?" "Every few months." "And your mother's family? Are you close with them?" I set my fork down. "Some of them. My mom's sister lives near Boston. We get together when we can." Margaret nodded. She was drawing a map, I realized. Tracing bloodlines. establishing coordinates. So you're mostly on your own out here. It wasn't a question. It was a conclusion. Derek reached for my hand under the table. She's not on her own, Mom. She has me. Margaret smiled. Of course she does. Later, in the car, Derek said, she liked you. I could tell. Did she? Yeah. She asked you a lot of questions. That's how she is when she's interested. I didn't argue. But I'd noticed something. Margaret hadn't asked about my interests, my passions, my work with children who were learning to speak despite neurological conditions that made speech nearly impossible. She'd asked about my family tree, my geography, my connections. She wasn't interested in who I was. She was interested in where I came from. I didn't understand why until years later. Derek and I married the following June. Small ceremony at a botanical garden in western Massachusetts. 45 guests. My father flew in with his wife. My brother came from California. Margaret wore a pale champagne dress that looked, in certain lights, almost white. Paige was my bridesmaid. She spent the morning of the wedding telling me how lucky I was to be marrying her brother. He's the best person I know, she said, adjusting my veil. Everyone in our family is so excited to have you. I smiled. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The first year of marriage was calm. We rented a small house in Framingham, 30 minutes from the Ashford compound. Close enough for Sunday dinners. Far enough that Margaret couldn't see our front door from her window. I worked 4 days a week at the pediatric center. Derek managed construction sites across eastern Massachusetts. We were building something together, a life, a home, a future. It felt solid. But Margaret had a way of entering spaces. She had a key to our house for emergencies, she'd said when she handed it to us, already cut, already on a ring with a little silver house charm. She used it more than I expected. She'd appear on random Tuesday afternoons, letting herself in through the side door, rearranging things. The spice rack. The bookshelf. Once, she reorganized our linen closet and left a note in her precise handwriting, towels folded by size now. Much easier. I thanked her. I always thanked her. Derek said that was just how she was. Paige visited often too, usually on weekends. She'd sit on our couch, scroll through Instagram, and make comments about our decorating choices. That rug is bold. Interesting art. You guys have such a unique style. Every compliment felt like a translation error. By year 2, I'd learned the rhythm of the Ashford family. Margaret was the sun. Everyone else orbited at distances she determined. Howard had learned decades ago to keep his head down. Derek avoided conflict the way some people avoid heights, not because he was weak, but because he'd been trained since childhood that confrontation with his mother was both futile and exhausting. And Paige had become Margaret's satellite, echoing her opinions, amplifying her signals, never questioning the gravity that held her in place. I was the newest object in the system, and Margaret was still calculating my trajectory. Our daughter was born on a Tuesday in early March. We named her Charlotte after my mother. She was 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly. The delivery room was quiet except for her crying, and when the nurse placed her on my chest, I felt something lock into place. Not love, that came later. Certainty. This child was mine. Nothing would change that. Margaret held Charlotte for the first time in the hospital room. She looked at her granddaughter with something that seemed, for a moment, like genuine softness. She has Derek's chin, she said. Definitely an Ashford. I was too tired to parse the comment then, but I remembered it later. For the first year, things were peaceful. Charlotte grew. Her hair fell out and grew back, still dark like Derek's. Margaret doted on her in the way grandmothers do. Gifts, visits, photographs. She stopped rearranging my furniture as much. She seemed, if not warm, at least less watchful. Then Charlotte's hair began to change. It started around 10 months. A subtle shift. The dark brown lightened at the temples first, then spread. By 14 months, my daughter's head was covered in curls the color of honey. By 18 months, that honey had brightened to something closer to amber. And by her second birthday, Charlotte Calloway had a cascade of golden red curls that caught the light like spun copper. I thought it was stunning. My maternal grandmother had the same hair. Her grandmother before her. Irish ancestry on my mother's side. The genetics made perfect sense to me. Margaret noticed immediately. Interesting, she said at Charlotte's second birthday party, touching one of the curls between her thumb and forefinger. Where does the red come from? I explained. Recessive genes. Maternal line. Skips generations. Margaret nodded, touched her pearl earring, and said, red hair doesn't run in the Ashford family. She said it lightly. The way you mention a spot on an X-ray. Not alarming. Just something that should probably be looked at. Paige was standing nearby. She tilted her head at Charlotte, then at me, then at Derek. She really doesn't look like any of us, she said. Maybe she'll grow out of it. The comments became routine after that. Every family gathering. Every holiday. Every random Tuesday when Margaret let herself in and found Charlotte playing on the floor. Still so blonde. Those curls are really something. She looks more like you every day, Whitney. Hardly any Ashford at all. I started keeping track. 17 comments in 8 months. I wrote them in a small notebook I kept in my nightstand drawer. Dates, words, context. I'd learned to document things during my clinical training. Progress notes, treatment plans, behavioral observations. Documentation was how I understood patterns. The pattern here was unmistakable. Paige amplified everything. She posted photos of Charlotte on her Instagram with captions like, "Our little mystery girl," and "Those curls, though." Genetic lottery, I guess. The comments from her followers were full of heart emojis and laughing faces, and "She's adorable no matter what." But the subtext was there, humming beneath every post like a frequency only I could hear. Derek's extended family started treating me differently. At a summer barbecue, Derek's uncle Gerald avoided eye contact with me for 3 hours. His cousin Beth, who'd always been friendly, stopped returning my texts. And Aunt Lucille, Margaret's older sister, started watching me across dinner tables with an expression I couldn't name, but instinctively recognized. It was the look of someone waiting for a verdict. Nobody said anything directly. That was the genius of it. Margaret wasn't building a case with accusations. She was building it with silences, with raised eyebrows, with the quiet, patient cultivation of doubt. By the time Charlotte turned 3, the air in the Ashford house had become heavy with things unsaid. The lunchbox incident happened in late September. I'd had an early meeting at the pediatric center. A new patient with a traumatic brain injury needed a full evaluation, and I was the lead therapist on the case. Margaret offered to watch Charlotte for the morning. I dropped her off with her diaper bag, her stuffed rabbit, and the blue lunchbox she'd used for the past 6 months. When I picked her up at 5, the lunchbox was gone. "Oh, that old thing," Margaret said. "It was stained." I threw it out. It wasn't stained. I'd bought it 3 months earlier. I didn't push. I thanked her, loaded Charlotte into the car, and drove home. But something else lingered in my memory. When I'd walked through Margaret's kitchen to collect Charlotte's jacket, I'd seen a small Ziploc bag on the counter. The kind used for specimen collection or snack storage. Margaret had moved quickly, tucking it into a drawer before I could read the label. "Just organizing," she'd said. And on her desk in the hallway, partially visible behind a stack of bills, I'd noticed a manila envelope. Thick. Sealed. With a return address I didn't recognize. I didn't connect any of it that night. The lunchbox. The Ziploc bag. The envelope. They were puzzle pieces scattered across a table. But my brain, the part trained to notice patterns in children who couldn't tell me what hurt, was already working. At the pediatric center, I was someone else. Not a different person, a fuller version of the same one. In Margaret's world, I was careful, measured, always calibrating. At work, I was calm because I'd chosen to be. There's a difference. My caseload that fall included a 4-year-old boy named Elliot. He'd been born with a rare genetic disorder that affected his motor planning. His hands couldn't reliably do what his brain asked them to do. Holding a crayon was a negotiation between intention and execution that took months. I worked with him 3 times a week, guiding his fingers, adjusting his grip, waiting. Some days he screamed with frustration. Some days he laughed. Most days he just stared at the crayon like it was a lock he couldn't find the key for. One Thursday, he drew a line. Not a circle, not a shape, just a line, deliberate and straight, from one edge of the paper to the other. His mother wept in the hallway. I sat in the supply closet after my shift and let myself feel it. My supervisor, Dr. Okonkwo, stopped me in the hallway the following week. "Whitney, you're the calmest person I've ever worked with. Nothing rattles you." I made $78,000 a year. Enough to pay my student loans, contribute to Charlotte's college fund, and cover the occasional dinner out with Derek. I mention this because later, when Margaret tried to imply I'd married Derek for financial stability, it mattered that I'd built my life before he was in it. I'd put myself through graduate school. I'd earned my certification. I'd chosen this work because helping a child find their voice when the world had assumed they wouldn't have one, that was the closest thing to meaning I'd ever known. Margaret never asked about my work. Not once in 8 years. The DNA test entered my life on a Wednesday morning in early October. I was at the center, between patients, reviewing treatment plans. My phone rang. Local number. "Mrs. Calloway? This is Elaine from Veritas Genetic Laboratories. I'm calling to confirm we've received a sample for analysis under your daughter's name, Charlotte Calloway, age 3. I set down my pen. I didn't submit any sample. The submission was made under the name Margaret Ashford. She listed herself as the child's grandmother. However, our policy requires documented parental consent for genetic testing on minors. We've placed the test on hold pending your authorization. Would you like to proceed or cancel?" "Cancel." My voice didn't shake. It never does in moments that matter. Something I learned from watching my mother navigate terminal illness with more grace than most people bring to a dinner party. I hung up. I sat in my office chair for 4 minutes. I stared at the anatomical chart on my wall, larynx, pharynx, vocal folds. I let the Latin terms ground me. Then I picked up my phone and called a family law attorney. Let me pause here. What I did in the 14 days between that phone call and the Sunday dinner that changed everything is the reason I'm standing where I am today. If you've ever felt like someone was slowly trying to dismantle your family, stay with me. This part matters. Her name was Elena Vasquez. She practiced family law out of a small office in Newton. 15 years of experience. Reputation for being direct. I told her everything. The comments about Charlotte's hair. The Ziploc bag. The phone call from Veritas. Elena listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. Under Massachusetts law, a grandparent cannot authorize genetic testing on a minor child without the express written consent of a parent or legal guardian. What she did is a violation of your daughter's privacy rights. It's also potentially actionable as fraud if she forged consent documents. She paused. "Did you see the submission form?" "No. The lab called me before anything was processed." "Good. That means they have protocols. Did she use any at-home consumer kits?" "I don't know." "Find out. Those have different consent standards. If she submitted to one of those platforms, the data may already be out there." She made a note. "In the meantime, don't confront her. Don't tell your husband yet." "Why not?" "Because if you tell Derek, he'll call his mother. She'll cry, apologize, and ask him to handle it privately. The pattern will repeat." Elena's voice was calm but firm. "If you want this to stop permanently, Let her play her hand. Let her show everyone exactly what she's willing to do. I paid the consultation fee, $400. Best money I've ever spent. Walking out of Elena's office, I called Veritas back and confirmed the sample had been destroyed. I asked them to flag any future submissions involving Charlotte's name. Then I drove to pick up Charlotte from daycare. She ran to me at the door, arms up, golden curls everywhere. I held her and thought, nobody is taking anything from us. That night, after Charlotte went to sleep, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I searched DNA testing consent laws in Massachusetts. Minor children. The results confirmed everything Elena had told me. Parental consent was mandatory. A grandparent had no standing. Then I searched at home DNA test kits. No parental consent required. The consumer platforms, the ones that advertised ancestry and family connections on television, had consent checkboxes that were easy to bypass. I am the parent or legal guardian. Click. Submit. Done. Margaret had used Veritas for what I assumed was a paternity-focused test. But had she also used a consumer platform? I opened Margaret's Facebook page. She rarely posted, but Paige tagged her constantly. Family photos. Charlotte's birthday. I scrolled back. In January, Paige had shared an article, What Your DNA Can Reveal About Your Family's Hidden History. Margaret had commented, fascinating. I had no idea these tests could show so much. I took a screenshot. Saved it to a folder on my desktop labeled documentation. Then I opened my nightstand notebook, the one where I'd been recording Margaret's comments. 17 entries in 8 months. I added an 18th. October 4th. Veritas Laboratories confirmed DNA sample submitted under Margaret Ashford's name without parental consent. Test canceled by my authorization. I closed the notebook. Derek was already asleep. I wanted to wake him. I wanted to show him everything. But Elena's voice kept circling, let her play her hand. So I turned off the lamp. And I waited. The hardest part wasn't the waiting. It was carrying the knowledge alone. For the next 3 days, I moved through my life as if nothing had changed. I went to work. I treated patients. I came home and made dinner and gave Charlotte her bath and read her the same book about a bunny that she requested every single night. Derek noticed nothing, and I don't blame him. He was managing 4 construction sites. He came home exhausted. He kissed Charlotte on the forehead. He kissed me on the mouth. He fell asleep by 9:30. One night, Charlotte crawled into our bed at 2 in the morning. She does this sometimes, bare feet padding down the hall, climbing in like a small diplomat negotiating a treaty. She curled into Derek's side, her golden curls fanned across the pillow. I watched them in the dim glow of the nightlight. My husband. My daughter. His steady breathing. Her small fist gripping his shirt. I thought about my mother. She'd raised 2 children alone after my father died. No, not died. I need to correct that. My father was very much alive in Springfield, teaching physics, attending school board meetings, living his quiet life with his second wife. But after my mother passed when I was 14, I'd learned something about resilience. She'd been a nurse before she got sick. She taught me that documentation was a form of power. Insurance claims. Medical records. Budgets on the backs of envelopes. She'd navigated a system designed to exhaust her, and she'd done it by writing everything down. Information isn't power, she used to say. Knowing when to use it is. At work, I helped a 7-year-old girl practice forming words after a stroke had stolen her language. She struggled with M sounds. Mama became a battle fought 1 syllable at a time. She tried 17 times. On the 18th, she said it clearly. Her mother collapsed into a chair and sobbed. I wrote in my notes, patient produced bilabial nasal in isolation with verbal model. Emerging consistency noted. Some things can't be rushed. You prepare. You position. You wait for the moment when the grip holds. On day 5, I got my first piece of luck. Or maybe not luck. Maybe just the inevitable result of a family where everyone underestimated me. I drove to Margaret's house to pick up a sweater Charlotte had left there the previous weekend. Margaret was out book club, Paige said when she answered the door. Paige was in the living room, phone propped up on a stack of coffee table books, talking to someone on FaceTime. I walked past her toward the mudroom where Charlotte's things were. The house was quiet except for Paige's voice, which carried the way it always did, louder than necessary, as if the world needed to witness her participation in it. Mom has the DNA results, she was saying. She's doing it at Sunday dinner. The whole family's going to be there. She says once Derek sees the proof, he won't be able to ignore it anymore. I stopped. My hand hovered above Charlotte's sweater. The voice on the other end said something I couldn't hear. I know, right? Paige laughed. It's going to be insane. Like, finally everyone will know. I picked up the sweater. Walked back through the living room. Paige saw me, killed the call instantly. Oh, hey. Just chatting with a friend. Did you find everything? I smiled. Yes. Thanks, Paige. Tell your mom I said hello. I walked to my car. Sat behind the wheel. Placed both hands on the steering wheel. And pressed until my knuckles went white. Now I knew 4 things. When? Sunday. Where? The dinner table. Who? The entire family. And what Margaret believed, that the results would prove Charlotte wasn't Derek's. I started the car. I wasn't going to stop her. I was going to let her light the match. The fire would find its own way back. On day 7, I found the secret that changed everything. I'd created an account on the same consumer DNA platform I suspected Margaret had used. I wanted to understand how familial matching worked. What I discovered was this. When you submit a DNA sample, the system doesn't just test for paternity. It scans the entire database for genetic relatives, siblings, half-siblings, cousins, anyone who shares enough DNA markers with your sample. The algorithm connects dots you didn't even know existed. Margaret had submitted Charlotte's DNA. I was almost certain of it now, which meant Charlotte's profile had been cross-referenced with every other profile in the system. It took me another 2 days to get into the account. I found the password through a security reset. Margaret had used Charlotte's birthday. Of course she had. And there, under the Familial Matches tab, was a name I'd never seen. Samuel K., age 38. Seattle, Washington. Relationship estimate, half-uncle to Charlotte Calloway. I stared at the screen. Half-uncle meant Samuel shared a biological parent with either Derek or with me. Since I hadn't submitted my own DNA to this platform, only Charlotte's was in the system. The match had to be on Derek's side, which meant either Howard had a secret child or Margaret did. I took a screenshot, saved it to the documentation folder, emailed it to Elena. Elena called the next morning. If this match is accurate, someone in the Ashford bloodline has a biological connection to this man that they haven't disclosed. Or Margaret has one, I said. She's the one who submitted the sample. Elena was quiet for a moment. Then we need to find out who Samuel K. is. Samuel Keith Brennan. Born February 1987. Seattle, Washington. Adopted at birth through a private agency in Boston, Massachusetts. It took me 2 evenings to find this. The DNA platform had limited public information, but Samuel had opted into the open contact feature. His profile said, adopted at birth. Searching for biological family. Open to conversation. I didn't contact him. That wasn't my place. But I did the math. Born 1987. Margaret would have been 23. She and Howard married in 1991 when she was 27. Derek was born in 1993. Margaret had a child 4 years before she married Howard. She gave that child up for adoption. And she never told anyone, except possibly the one person who'd been watching me across dinner tables with that strange, waiting expression. Aunt Lucille. When I looked at Samuel's DNA match report more carefully, I noticed something else. The platform listed shared matches, other profiles that connected to both Samuel and Charlotte. One of them was tagged Lucille R., possible aunt or half-aunt. Lucille's middle name was Ruth. Lucille Ruth. She'd known. For 36 years, she'd known. I sat at my kitchen table in the dark and thought about Margaret. Not with anger. Not yet. I thought about a 23-year-old woman, unmarried, probably terrified, making a decision that would trail behind her for the rest of her life. I understood that kind of fear. I'd grown up watching my mother make impossible choices on impossible timelines. But understanding a choice and forgiving the lie that follows it, those are not the same thing. Margaret hadn't just given up a child. She'd buried the truth so deep that she'd convinced herself the only threat to her family's bloodline was me. She was terrified of being exposed, and she turned that terror into a weapon aimed at my daughter. She wasn't protecting her family. She was protecting her secret. Thursday, Margaret called. Her voice was bright. Rehearsed bright. Big family dinner this Sunday. I want everyone there. I've already told Howard to invite Gerald and Beth. And Lucille will be there too. A pause. It's important. Please make sure you come. We'll be there, I said. Friday, I printed everything. Screenshots. Lab confirmation from Veritas. Platform login records. The familial match report for Samuel Brennan. I backed everything up to the cloud and emailed copies to Elena. Elena, I said on the phone, if she presents the test publicly, that strengthens our position in any civil action, correct? Yes. You have witnesses. The entire family. Good. Are you sure you want to go through with this? You could confront her privately. End it before Sunday. I'm sure. Saturday night, I gave Charlotte her bath. She sat in the tub, splashing, her golden curls slicked dark against her neck. I worked the shampoo through gently, untangling the small knots. Mommy, she said, why does Gamma Margaret always touch my hair? I paused. My 3-year-old. Already noticing. Because your hair is beautiful, sweetheart. Is it magic hair? I smiled. The most magic. I dried her, dressed her in pajamas, read her the bunny book. She fell asleep holding my thumb. Derek came upstairs later. Mom seems really excited about tomorrow. Any idea what's going on? I looked at him. My husband. Kind face. Tired eyes. Good man who'd spent 34 years believing his mother was exactly who she said she was. I guess we'll find out, I said. I lay in bed that night and didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and ran through every scenario. In every version, the truth came out. The only variable was how much it would cost. Sunday morning. I dressed carefully. Navy blue blouse, soft, not aggressive. Dark jeans. The small silver necklace Derek had given me on our first anniversary. No war paint. No armor. Just me. Charlotte wore a yellow dress with white flowers. She spun twice in the hallway mirror before I caught her. Derek loaded the car. 35 minutes north. Classic rock on the radio. Charlotte fell asleep before we hit the highway. I watched Derek's hands on the steering wheel. Strong hands. Builder's hands. He constructed buildings for a living, structures designed to hold weight, withstand pressure, last decades. And I thought, today those hands will either hold mine or let go. We pulled into Margaret's driveway at 4:15. Four cars were already there. Howard's truck. Paige's sedan. A silver Lexus I recognized as Lucille's. And Gerald's minivan. Full house. Margaret met us at the door. She hugged Derek long, firm, the kind of hug that says I'm about to do something I've convinced myself is righteous. She nodded at me, brief, efficient. Put Charlotte down upstairs. She can nap in the guest room. I carried her up, laid her on the bed, pulled a light blanket over her legs. Her golden curls fanned across the white pillow. Downstairs, the family had assembled. Howard in his usual leather chair. Gerald beside him. Beth on the couch, phone in hand, leg bouncing. Paige at the dining table, arranging napkins. Lucille standing by the china cabinet, arms crossed, mouth tight. And on the hallway table, right where I'd seen it weeks ago, the manila envelope. Thick. Sealed. Waiting. Margaret caught me looking at it. She smiled. The pearl earring smile. "Dinner first," she said. The roast was excellent. I'll give Margaret that. She'd always been a talented cook, one of the few things about her that wasn't performative. Howard told a story about a fishing trip. Gerald laughed. Beth complimented the potatoes. Normal sounds. Normal dinner. But I was watching the currents beneath the surface. Paige checked her phone every 30 seconds. Not texting, just checking the time. She was on a clock. Lucille held her fork like a railing on a steep staircase. Tight grip. Eyes straight ahead. She ate almost nothing. Margaret sat at the head of the table. She smiled at everyone. She asked about Gerald's new car. She refilled Howard's water. She was performing calm the way an actor performs grief, technically flawless, emotionally hollow. 20 minutes in, the small talk had exhausted itself. Howard was mid-sentence about a home improvement project. Margaret stood up. She smoothed her blouse, tucked a strand of dyed brown hair behind her ear, cleared her throat. "Before dessert," she said, "there's something I need to share with the family." The table went silent. Howard stopped talking. Gerald set his fork down. Beth looked at Paige. Paige looked at her plate. Lucille closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough for me to notice. Margaret walked to the hallway. Returned with the manila envelope. She held it at chest level, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. What happened in the next 3 minutes changed everything, not just for me, for every person at that table. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the moment. Stay with me. Margaret set the envelope on the table. Slid it toward Derek. "Open it." Derek looked at the envelope. Then at his mother. "What is this?" Margaret placed both hands flat on the table. She'd rehearsed this. I could tell by her breathing, measured, controlled. The same cadence she probably used during difficult conversations at the private school where she'd worked as a development director for 2 decades. "This is a DNA test," she said. "For Charlotte." The room contracted. I felt it, the walls pulling inward, the air thinning. Howard set his glass down. "Margaret, what did you do?" Margaret didn't look at him. She looked at me. "No offense, Whitney. But this family deserves the truth." Derek's voice dropped. "Mom, what truth?" "I had Charlotte tested privately because I love this family. Because that child," she pointed toward the ceiling, toward the room where our daughter slept, "does not look like an Ashford." Paige leaned forward. Lucille stared at her plate. Margaret's voice rose half a register. She was reaching the part she'd practiced most. "I've said it before. I'll say it again. Red hair does not run in the Ashford family. And I think Derek has a right to know whether that child is really his." The sentence landed on the table like a stone through glass. Gerald looked at his hands. Beth's mouth opened, then closed. Howard gripped the armrest of his chair. Derek stared at the envelope. His hands were steady, but his jaw was working the way it does when he's choosing between silence and something irreversible. "Open it," Margaret said again. She was smiling. She believed, truly, completely believed, that the contents of that envelope would prove her right. She was wrong. Derek picked up the envelope, broke the seal, pulled out a stack of pages, 5 or 6 sheets on lab letterhead. He read the first page in silence. 15 seconds. Maybe 20. Long enough for Margaret to shift her weight from one foot to the other. Long enough for Paige to stop breathing. Derek looked up. He looked at Margaret. "She's mine." Margaret blinked. "What?" "Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. He held up the page. "Charlotte is my daughter." the smile on Margaret's face didn't fall. It fractured. Like ice on a windshield, still in place, but no longer holding. That can't be right. Let me see. She reached for the papers. Derek pulled them back. No. You've done enough. Paige leaned forward. Maybe the lab made a mistake. Shut up, Paige. Paige recoiled like she'd been slapped. In 27 years, Derek had never spoken to her like that. The room understood. Something had shifted in him. A door that had been propped open his entire life had just closed. Margaret's hand went to her pearl earring, twisting. The gesture I'd seen at our first dinner together. At Thanksgiving. At Easter. At every moment when Margaret's certainty met resistance, and she needed something to hold on to. There must be a mistake, she said. Her voice was smaller now. The hair. The coloring. It doesn't make sense. Derek set the papers down. He looked at me for the first time since Margaret had stood up. I'd been sitting at the far end of the table, quiet, hands folded in my lap. Watching. Now it was my turn. The results are correct, Margaret. My voice was level, the same voice I use when a parent asks me if their child will ever speak normally. Calm. Clear. Carrying more weight than volume. I know because I called the lab 2 weeks ago. When they contacted me to verify parental consent. Consent that you never obtained. The room shifted. Not a sound, a vibration. The kind you feel in the floor before a train arrives. Howard leaned forward. You tested our granddaughter without their permission? Margaret's chin lifted. I was protecting this family. Under Massachusetts state law, I said, a grandparent cannot authorize genetic testing of a minor without written parental consent. Your attorney can explain the specifics if you'd like. Mine already has. I said it the way I document patient progress. Factual. Chronological. Without adjectives. Margaret's face cycled through 3 colors in as many seconds. Pink to red to white. Her hand dropped from the earring. But the lab shouldn't have. The lab followed protocol. You didn't. Silence. Paige pressed her lips together. Gerald looked at Howard. Howard looked at Margaret with an expression I'd never seen him wear. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something worse. The look of someone realizing they don't recognize the person across from them. I let the silence hold. 1 second. 2. 3. Then I said, but that's not the most interesting thing in those results. Every head turned. Derek looked at me. What do you mean? Keep reading, I said. Page 4. He flipped past the paternity confirmation. Past the methodology. Past the consent disclosure. He reached the familial match report. Derek read aloud slowly, the way you read something you don't yet understand. Potential familial match. Samuel B., age 38. Seattle, Washington. Relationship estimate. Half-uncle to Charlotte Calloway. He stopped. Looked at the page again. Looked at me. Looked at Margaret. Half-uncle. That would mean he's either my half-brother or Whitney's. He's not mine, I said. Derek turned to Margaret. Mom. Who is Samuel? Margaret's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her hands gripped the edge of the table. Her pearl earring, the one she'd been touching all night, hung motionless. Even the nervous gesture had abandoned her. I don't know what that. Lucille's fork hit the plate. She stood up. Margaret. Don't. 2 words. The room understood everything. Gerald leaned back. Lucille, sit down. Howard stood slowly. His chair scraped across the hardwood, a sound that cut through the silence like a blade dragged across stone. Margaret. Answer the question. Margaret's eyes filled. She looked at Lucille. Lucille shook her head, a small, desperate no. It was before you, Margaret said. Her voice cracked. Not the practiced crack of a woman performing vulnerability. A real crack. The kind that comes from a wall bearing weight for 36 years, finally giving way. Before your father. I was 23. I wasn't ready. You had a child. Derek's voice was flat. I was so young. I was so scared. You had a child. And you never told me. He stood now too. You never told Dad. Howard's hand found the back of his chair. He held it the way you hold something when the ground is no longer steady. 36 years. Howard's voice was quiet, electrician's hands flat on the table. We've been married 32. Margaret. Howard, please. It was before us. I was so ashamed. You told Lucille. He looked at Lucille, who was still standing, one hand on the china cabinet. But not me. Lucille, she was there. She helped me. I was so scared. Were you scared for 36 years, Margaret? The question landed and stayed. Nobody moved. Margaret cried. Real tears this time. Not the performative kind she deployed when Derek forgot to call on Sundays or when Paige canceled plans. These were the tears of a woman watching a foundation she'd built with silence crumble under the weight of her own scheme. For one moment, one small, strange moment, I saw her. Not the Margaret who'd spent 8 years questioning my daughter's parentage, but the 23-year-old girl who sat in a hospital in Boston and signed papers and walked away from a baby she wasn't allowed to keep. I understood that girl. My heart ached for her. Then Margaret wiped her eyes, straightened her back, and said, "This is Whitney's fault. She brought this up to humiliate me." The moment of sympathy evaporated, like steam off a window. Gone. Derek stepped forward. Mom, Whitney didn't bring anything up. You ordered the DNA test. You planned this dinner. You slid that envelope across the table. He picked up the pages, held them toward her. I think you need to see this. He said it slowly. The exact words she'd used 20 minutes earlier. Isn't that what you said? Well, we saw it. Margaret sat down. Not in her chair, she missed it slightly. Caught the edge. Lucille reached for her. Margaret pushed her hand away. Paige was crying. Mascara tracked down both cheeks. She looked less like a 29-year-old lifestyle influencer and more like a child who'd just discovered the rules of her world were not what she'd been told. I didn't know about Samuel, she said. Mom, you told me Charlotte wasn't Derek's. You said you had proof. You said. She's not the red hair, Margaret's voice fractured. Derek cut in. Mom, I'm the one with the recessive gene. He pulled out his phone, swiped through his photos, found what he was looking for, held it up for the table. A photograph. Old, taken in the early 1980s, judging by the clothes. A young woman standing in a garden, squinting into the sun. She had red hair. I found this in the attic last year, Derek said. In a box of old photos you told me were Aunt Lucille's. It's you, Mom. Age 19 or 20. Gerald leaned in. Margaret. Is that you? Your hair was red. Margaret's hand, the one that always found her pearl earring, hung at her side. She reached up slowly, unclipped the earring, set it on the table. The small gold post clicked against the wood. I started dyeing it at 19, she said. I always hated it. The red hair that didn't run in the Ashford family had run through Margaret's veins since birth. She'd buried it under 4 decades of salon appointments and careful maintenance. And when her granddaughter was born with the same trait, she didn't see inheritance. She saw exposure. Paige looked at me. Her face was raw, stripped of performance. I'm so sorry, Whitney. I should have. I know you didn't, Paige. There was nothing else to say at that table. Howard picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He put it on slowly, the way he did everything. Deliberate. Measured. I'm going for a drive, he said. He didn't look at Margaret. Derek turned to me. Get Charlotte. I went upstairs. Charlotte was still sleeping, golden curls spread across the white pillow like small copper rivers. I lifted her gently. She stirred, pressed her face into my neck, settled. I carried her downstairs. The dining room was emptying. Gerald had his coat. Beth was at the front door, keys in hand. Lucille stood by the china cabinet, frozen, arms wrapped around herself. At the front door, Margaret stepped in front of Derek. Her eyes were swollen. Her hair, that carefully dyed brown, looked suddenly wrong. Like a costume she'd forgotten to remove. Derek. Please don't leave like this. We can talk. Derek stopped. Looked at her. You didn't want to talk, Mom. You wanted to perform. Lucille tried. Everyone just needs to calm down. Howard, already at his truck, called back without turning. Lucille. If you say one more word, I'm calling my lawyer in the morning. The sentence landed on the porch like a gavel. Lucille went silent. Gerald passed her without a word. Beth followed, eyes on the ground. I carried Charlotte to the car. Derek opened the door. I buckled her into the car seat. She murmured something about her stuffed rabbit. I handed it to her. She grabbed it with both hands and went back to sleep. Behind us, Margaret's house, the house she'd ruled for 3 decades, emptied one person at a time. The dinner she'd planned to expose me had emptied her own home. We drove in silence for 10 minutes. Charlotte slept in the back. The highway was empty, Sunday evening, most people already home. Streetlights passed overhead in slow rhythm, casting amber bands across the dashboard. Derek spoke first. How long did you know about the test? 2 weeks. About Samuel? About a week. Why didn't you tell me? I'd practiced this answer. Not in words, in logic. I knew the shape of it before I knew the sentences. Because I needed you to see it yourself. If I'd told you privately, you would have called her. She would have cried. She would have apologized. She would have asked you to keep it in the family. And nothing would have changed. He gripped the steering wheel. Released. Gripped again. You're saying I would have let her off the hook. I'm saying the pattern was 34 years old. I couldn't break it with a conversation. You needed to see her perform. Quiet for a mile. Then, she dyed her hair for 40 years. Red hair was hers all along. I know. Another mile. I have a brother. A half-brother. In Seattle. Samuel. He said the name like he was tasting it. Testing its weight. I watched him, his profile against the passing lights. The jaw that Charlotte had inherited. The shoulders that carried more than construction materials. He was processing. Not shutting down. Not deflecting. Processing. He reached across the center console. Found my hand. Held it. He didn't let go until we pulled into our driveway. He turned off the engine. Sat for a moment. Looked at me. Thank you, he said. For not protecting me from this. I squeezed his hand. That's not what partners do. Monday, Derek called Margaret. I need time. Don't contact Whitney or Charlotte. How long? Until I'm ready. He hung up. Poured coffee. Went to work. That was Derek, process by doing. Tuesday, Howard called. He was staying at Gerald's house. I told your mother I need space to think, he said. His voice was even. No tremor. No crack. Electrician's steadiness. 32 years of marriage. That's a lot of wire to trace back. Wednesday, Paige texted me 3 words. I am sorry. Then a longer message. I should have questioned Mom instead of believing her. I was wrong. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. I replied, thank you for saying that. Thursday, Elena sent Margaret a formal letter. Cease and desist regarding unauthorized genetic testing of Charlotte Calloway. Notice of potential civil action under Massachusetts privacy statutes. Preservation demand for all related documents and communications. Margaret called Derek, panicked. Derek told her to read the letter carefully and call a lawyer. Friday evening, Derek sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open. He'd been quiet all week, not withdrawn, just focused. Like he was building something in his head. I found him, he said. Samuel. He's a high school English teacher. Coaches cross country. Married, no kids yet. Derek turned the screen toward me. A photo on a school website. Samuel Brennan, sandy brown hair, same jaw as Derek, same slight crook in the nose. He posted on the DNA platform 4 years ago, looking for his birth mother. On the desk behind us, the manila envelope sat where I'd placed it when we got home Sunday night. Unsealed. The document that was meant to destroy us had become the document that rebuilt the truth. Derek emailed Samuel on Saturday morning. He wrote and deleted it 4 times. I watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand, saying nothing. He needed to find the words himself. The final version was short. My name is Derek Calloway. I believe I'm your half-brother. My mother was born in Boston, Massachusetts in 1964. If you're open to talking, I would like that. Samuel responded in 2 hours. I've been looking for her for 8 years. I never expected to hear from a brother. They scheduled a video call for that evening. Derek set up his laptop at the kitchen table. I took Charlotte to the living room to watch her bunny show. At 7:15, I heard Derek say, "Hi, I'm Derek." And then a voice I didn't recognize, deeper than Derek's, steadier. "Hi, Derek. I'm Samuel." I stayed in the living room, but I could hear them. After 20 minutes, I heard Derek cry. Not the quiet kind. The kind that comes from deep in the chest. From a place most men spend their lives pretending doesn't exist. I stood in the kitchen doorway. On the screen, Samuel was crying too. Same jaw. Same eyes. 36 years apart, and they looked like 2 versions of the same blueprint. "Does she know?" Samuel asked. "My birth mother?" Derek wiped his face. "She knows. It didn't go well. I don't want to cause problems. I just wanted to know where I came from." "You're not causing problems, Samuel. You're not the one who lied." Charlotte tugged my hand. "Mommy, why is Daddy sad?" I picked her up. "He's not sad, sweetheart. He's meeting someone new." 2 weeks later, Margaret came to our door unannounced. The old pattern. Same side entrance. Same assumption that her presence was always welcome. Except now the side door was locked. I'd changed the code. She knocked. I opened the front door. She stood on the step in a gray cardigan, eyes rimmed red, looking 10 years older than the woman who'd slid an envelope across a dinner table with the confidence of someone who believed she was saving her family. "I need to explain," she said. "I was 23. My parents made me give him up. I carried this guilt for decades." Derek appeared behind me. "Then you should have dealt with it honestly. Instead, you projected it onto my wife and my daughter." I was trying to protect. "You weren't protecting anyone, Mom. You were protecting your secret." Margaret looked at me. "Whitney, please. I'm asking for a chance." I considered her for a long moment. This woman who'd spent 8 years measuring me, cataloging my flaws, salting the ground between me and her family. This woman who'd stolen my daughter's DNA. This woman who'd planned a public execution at her own dinner table and called it love. "Margaret, you're welcome to have a relationship with Charlotte. She loves you. We won't take that from her." Hope flickered in her eyes. "But it will be on our terms. On our schedule. And you will never be alone with her again." The hope dimmed. But it didn't die. She nodded. "Those are the terms," I said. She didn't argue. For the first time in 8 years, maybe for the first time in her life, Margaret Ashford didn't argue. She stepped off the porch, walked to her car, drove away. Howard called Derek on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the dinner. "Been at Gerald's since that night," he said. "First time in my life I've slept under another man's roof." "You okay, Dad?" "I've been seeing a counselor." "Don't laugh." "I'm not laughing. My guy, Dr. Franklin, he says I need to figure out what I can live with and what I can't." Howard paused. The line was quiet except for the sound of wind. He was probably standing outside, in Gerald's yard. "I can live with a mistake she made at 23. People make mistakes. Lord knows I have. But I can't live with 36 years of silence." That's not a mistake. That's a decision made every single day. Derek didn't respond. Sometimes silence is the kindest thing a son can offer. The following Saturday, Howard drove to our house. He brought a toy truck he'd made in Gerald's garage, hand-sanded, painted red, with wooden wheels that actually turned. "For my granddaughter," he said at the door. Charlotte saw him from the hallway. She ran. "Papa Howard." He scooped her up. She pressed her face into his flannel collar, her golden curls against his plaid shirt. He held her for a long time. Then he looked at Derek. "She looks like your mother did at this age. You know, before your mother started dyeing it." Derek nodded. "I know." Howard set Charlotte down. She rolled the truck across the porch, making engine sounds. He watched her with the expression of a man who'd just rewired his entire understanding of the past, tracing every connection back to its source, finding shorts and dead ends, deciding which circuits were still worth keeping. 6 months later, Derek flew to Seattle and met Samuel in person. They sat in a diner for 4 hours. Two men with the same jaw, the same slightly crooked nose. 36 years of distance between them. Samuel brought his wife, Elena. Derek brought photos of Charlotte. In August, Samuel and Elena visited Massachusetts. Charlotte and Samuel played in our backyard, while Derek and his brother sat on the porch, drinking iced tea, watching the sprinkler arc back and forth across the grass. I stood in the kitchen window and watched them. Two brothers finding each other in the middle of their lives. Margaret and Howard went to couples therapy. Howard moved back home after 2 months, but he set conditions. Honesty. Full disclosure. No more locked drawers. No more buried histories. Margaret agreed. She stopped dyeing her hair. It came in silver gray now, with traces of red at the temples. The ghost of the girl she'd tried to erase. Paige apologized formally. In writing. A letter, handwritten for Pages, mailed to both me and Derek. It was the most honest thing she'd ever produced. The relationship is rebuilding. Slowly. The way you rebuild anything worth keeping. One honest conversation at a time. Aunt Lucille was not invited to Thanksgiving. Nobody discussed it. The absence spoke clearly enough. At work, I helped a 5-year-old girl take her first steps in new leg braces. She grabbed my hands, pushed off, and stood for 3 seconds before sitting back down. Her mother sobbed. I wrote in my notes, patience stood unsupported for 3 seconds. Progress within expected range. Some things take time, but they come. The manila envelope sits in a drawer in my desk. I never threw it away. Not because I need it, but because it reminds me that sometimes the weapon someone builds to destroy you is the same weapon that sets you free. Here's what I know now. The people who try hardest to expose your secrets are usually the ones with the biggest secrets of their own. And the truth, the real truth, doesn't need a stage or an audience or a manila envelope slid across a dinner table. It just needs time. That's my story. A DNA test. A dinner table. And a secret that was 36 years old. If this reminded you to trust yourself when everyone else doubts you, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is where you are. I love reading those. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.